Hello dear students, today we are going to start a new topic called as cell signaling. Before moving on to cell signaling, let's learn what a signaling is. Signaling is a message that we convey from one person to another person, the way we talk with each other. That is the way we pass our signal to one person to another person. The same way, it is extremely important not for us but the things that we are made up of. What are we made up of? The cells. Yes. The cells do communicate with the neighboring cells or the other cells which are away from them by passing out certain signals so that they can carry out certain functions required for the body. The cells do not talk the way we do, but it's important for their messages or the signals to be transmitted and received. Multicellular organisms need many cells to be able to work together. Cells actually responds with the signals from their environment, which is a microenvironment that is very much necessary for the development of the tissues as well as the repair of the tissues, and it also builds up the immunity of the normal tissue. And it is a vast network between the cells, that is intracellular communication and intercellular communication, that is a communication within the cells. And if there is no coordination, then it is difficult for the formation of a multicellular organisms. The communication actually is carried out by passing certain signals. If there is no communication, then a cellular information which is responsible for the normal function of the cells won't happen, and that might lead to a certain diseases like cancer, autoimmune disease, and also it might lead to diabetes also. Why do we need to understand this cell communication? By understanding the cell communication, we can easily know what actually is the disease and how can we treat the disease effectively. So here is a nerve cell that is communicating with a muscle cell which helps in the contraction or the movement of the cell. Now let's see what is the actual definition of cell signaling is. Cell signaling is a fundamental process by which a specific information is transferred from one cell surface to the cytosol and ultimately to the nucleus, leading to the changes in gene expression, which clearly states that, which means that cell passes certain signals. Here you can see that a cell, it is passing a signal which is a chemical molecules, and these chemical molecules or the signals go and bind to the cell of another cell surface where it will be having a receptor where these signals go and bind there, and they enter the cytosol of that cell, and they ultimately reach the nucleus of the other cell, and thereby leading a changes in the gene expression. This is the definition of cell signaling. And coming on to the forms of cell signaling, they are of two types as I said earlier, which is intracellular and others are intercellular signaling. What is intracellular signaling? Intracellular signaling means here you can see that the cell is receiving a signal from the other cell, but there is a signal transformation or signal mutual signal exchange within the cell. This is called as a intracellular cell signaling. Another, here you can see that intercellular cell signaling, where one of the cell is producing the signals which is in the extracellular space, and this signal goes and binds to the another cell where it will be having a receptor which receives this signal and the further changes happen. This is called as an intercellular, where the signal exchange and the signal transformation taking place between the sending cell as well as the target cell. Here intracellular, which is the signal taking place within the cell. Okay, let's see what is target cell is. Certain signals are being produced by certain type of cells which are called as a producer cell, and these signals which are produced by these producer cells are being received by certain type of cells which is called as a receiver cell or a target cell. The cells producing the signals are called as producer cells. Those cells receiving those signals are called as target cells. And these producer cells produces the signals which are the chemical signals, that are proteins or other molecules, and which are being secreted by the cell which is called as a producer cells. These producer cell produces the chemical signals which I said, like proteins or any other chemicals. These are released into the extracellular space and they float like a message in a bottle and they reach the target cell. And these target cells, they should have a receptor binding site. This is called as a receptor binding site, which is actually the shape of the chemical signal that is being produced by the producer cells, and these go and bind onto the receptor binding site of a neighboring cell or any other cell where it has a receptor for the same type of signals that is being sent by the producer cell. And as soon as the message is carried out by a ligands, these signals are also called as ligands, these chemical messages, and ultimately as they reach the receptor there will be a change in the cell, and this alteration in the activity of the gene or even the induction of whole process such as cell division might take place, or there might be any other conversion might take place in the target cell. Here you can see this producer cell. These are producing certain signal molecules which are being received by the target cell by a receptor which is present on the surface of the cell, and after that there might be a changes in that cell which gives the signal to the cell that you need to do a transcription where the protein molecules are being formed. Here you can see another pictorial representation where sending cell or a producer cell is producing certain signals, chemical molecules that are present in the extracellular space of the cell, and these signals are being received by the receptor present on the surface of the another cell called as the target cell, and thereby showing some response to those signals which are being received by the sending cell. And another type of target cell is there which do not have the receptor or the right receptor for these chemical signals. So these signals are not accepted by these target cells, which is called as a non-target cell. We already have read about receptor. So what receptor is? Receptor is something which is present on the target cells which has the capacity to accept the chemical molecules that are being produced by the producer cells. So these receptors are having a receptors for hormones, like drugs also and or for other signaling molecules. Here you can see a pictorial representation where there are two hormones A and B, and there are cells also. Like this is a target cell which accepts only the signal, that if the cell produces a signal of hormone A, only those signals or those hormones are being accepted by these receptor, because it has only receptor binding shape for these hormone A. See, the receptor binding site is quite round. So these hormone A is also round. And here you can see another hormone B with of a different shape. Here you can see a diamond shaped hormone B which has a receptor binding site on another target cell. But there are certain cells which has a capacity to accept two different types of hormones or two different types of chemical signals. See, here is a cells which is having a receptor binding site for both the hormone, that is for hormone A as well as a hormone B. So these are the things about the receptors. Here you can see one more picture where ligand means the chemical signals are being sent by the cells, other cells, and this is a receptor which is accepting that signal of a same shape, and thereby the chemical messages these relay on the signals that is being sent by the other cell. Depending upon that signal, the further process will take place. We'll see the types of receptors. The first one is a intracellular receptor. These receptors are present inside the cytoplasm of the cell or in the nucleus of the cell. Here you can see a picture where there are two types of receptors, as I said earlier, which is intracellular, present inside the cell, like nuclear receptor and cytosolic receptor. The carrier protein which are being accepted by these receptors enters into the cytoplasm of the cell. Here you can see a receptor which binds this protein, which is having a receptor for this protein. It binds and the further process is carried out. So as another type of protein enters into the nucleus of the cell and further process of formation of the DNA takes place. And another type of receptor which is called as a cell surface receptor. And I forgot to tell about the intracellular receptors, that these are hydrophobic in nature. That is why they are entering inside the cell. The carrier proteins are hydrophobic in nature, therefore they are entering inside the cell. And another type of receptor which is called as a cell surface receptor. Here you can see a picture of a cell surface receptor, and these receptors are present on the surface of the plasma membrane of the cell. As these receptors are hydrophilic signal molecules bind to these kind of receptor. The hydrophilic signal molecules which are binding to these receptors cannot enter inside the cell because of its hydrophilic in nature, and the cell surface receptor can take only the hydrophilic nature containing signal molecules like G protein coupled receptors and tyrosine kinase receptor can be taken up by the cell surface receptor. As we know that the producer cell produces certain chemical molecules which are called as signals. These signals or the chemical molecules which are produced by the producer cells are called as ligands, and these ligands are hydrophilic in nature or hydrophobic in nature. Those which are hydrophobic in nature like steroids and gases like nitric acid then can pass through inside the cell membrane of the cell, and there are certain ligands, that is chemical signals which are hydrophilic in nature, they cannot pass through the cell membrane. Here you can see two types of ligands, that is large polar ligands, non-polar ligands. Proteins, ions and other type of molecules, these are hydrophilic in nature and these are large amount and they cannot pass through the cell membrane and therefore they bind to the receptor present on the surface of the cell membrane. This is a cell membrane where the receptor is present which receives the chemical signal which is called as a ligand on the surface of the cell membrane, on the surface of the cell membrane. And another type of ligand which is called as a non-polar ligand, like lipids, steroid hormones, can pass through easily inside the cell membrane where they have a receptor for this hormone. They further enter the nucleus and a new mRNA is synthesized and thereby a new protein is synthesized. Why they enter? Because they are hydrophobic in nature and they are smaller molecules when compared to the protein. Let us see the three-dimensional structure of a receptor binding a ligand. Here you can see the ligand binding to a receptor on the surface of the cell, which means that this is a protein molecule that cannot enter the cell. So till now we learnt what is cell signaling is and what is a target cell, receptor, a ligand. In the further slides we'll be learning about in much more details about the cell signaling.